Rick and Morty Season 8 followed up its very strong premiere with another very solid episode, with maybe our biggest and most in-depth focus on Space Beth since she was introduced back in Season 4. And this adventure is pretty fun and action-packed, giving us some great insight into the current state of the Galactic Federation, but for me, the episode's strengths all lie in that Space Beth exploration. It was the kind of deep dive into the character I was hoping for, particularly in exploring her dynamic with Rick. So let's take a look at Rick and Morty Season 8, Episode 2, Valyrick.
Wow, Beth, you've been staying busy.
I gotta say, though I fell a bit out of love with the show over the course of Seasons 4, 5, and 6, I've mostly really liked how they've handled Space Beth. The Season 4 finale, which centers around the reveal of her existence, is a very, very strong episode, and the way she's sort of slowly been reeled back in to be sort of the fun aunt of the Smith household, who shows up for holidays and big events but isn't around all the time, I think works really well. But I think this episode does an amazing job really showcasing Space Beth's attitude, motivations, and particularly that dynamic with Rick. The cold open acts as this pretty great setup that gives us one of our best sequences of Space Beth in her element, probably since she was initially revealed. It opens on the Galactic Defiance group that they introduced in the Season 4 finale, going over their plan to execute the Gromflemite Queen. I love that this is just a clear allusion and homage to the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars. This conference room feels straight out of Return of the Jedi, but they immediately give us our first real look at the state of Beth's relationship to the Defiance at this point, which is to say, she's kind of impatient with them mostly. Rather than show up for the meeting, Beth just goes ahead with the assassination attempt herself, skirting the red tape.
We're still in a meeting about this.
We've been meeting about it for months. Is the plan to kill her with old age?
Okay, I know that it's actually maybe a little exhausting how much of this show boils down to, damn, everyone's becoming more like Rick, especially after my video last week was so much about Summer's Rick-like tendencies, but I think in Space Beth's case, the development has a lot more nuance. Obviously, in action, Space Beth is a lot like Rick. Cool, nigh invincible space action hero, crazy gadgets. There's a reason they show her go toe-to-toe with Rick in her introduction back in Season 4, but this episode also shows that she has a real issue with authority. Just like Rick, her ideals align with the Galactic Defiance, but she is so fed up with the bureaucratic roadblocks and speed bumps that she just takes matters into her own hands. Rick, similarly, was shown to help create the Citadel and Council of Ricks while also refusing to bow to their rules, law, or authority. Beth definitely seemed to find some sort of meaning in her work with the Defiance, but the fact that she is barreling through the Defiance's guardrails to actually get stuff done shows that she's definitely growing impatient and that she's growing beyond the confines of the systems she's a part of. And honestly, a lot of this stuff was set up pretty well in the episode that began this entire saga, the ABCs of Beth. While she's in Fruipyland, Beth gets a little taste of what it might be like to have the kind of capabilities that Rick displays.
Oh my God, I'm my father. And the ugly truth has always been
That I'm not that great a guy and you're exactly like me.
This revelation sends Beth into an existential crisis over whether or not she chose the right life path for herself, but based on the dialogue here and her motivations and rhetoric, it does make sense that Space Beth basically pursued a Rick-like life. The revelation was caused by her relating to her father in a way that made her uncomfortable with the trajectory of her life, and then of course the entire clone debacle happened. But I also think that now with this episode, we may finally be seeing the latter phases of exactly what Rick is describing in the ABCs of Beth, when sort of goading her into potentially taking this life path.
You know, smart people get a chance to climb on top, take reality for a ride, but it'll never stop trying to throw you, and eventually it will. There's no other way off.
Space Beth is clearly tackling the universe on her terms more and more as the show goes on, and this episode is starting to show the ramifications of this kind of a lifestyle. This time, her gung-ho attitude put her in a wildly unexpected position. When she jumps the gun on her assassination, she discovers that the Queen had already been assassinated and is immediately stranded and blamed for everything, forcing her to call Daddy to pick her up.
Send the coordinates, I'll pick you up.
Really? Just like that?
Of course, just like that. You're my daughter, probably.
I think Space Beth's relation to Rick is very interesting because her entire existence was born from Beth realizing that she's more like her father than she realized and that she wants to explore life from that perspective. But at the same time, Space Beth obviously has a huge chip on her shoulder because she has to prove that she has her own value and beat the Nepo baby allegations. So she sort of carries these contradictory motivations to be like her father, but also to be appreciated outside outside of her relation to her father. There's a reason she was so angry that she had to call Rick to help her. And of course, Rick's pompous interference gets Beth fired from the Galactic Defiance. I think Rick's angle in this episode is also interesting because despite the fact that in a very Rick fashion, he let his ego mess things up for someone else, it doesn't feel like this was pure selfishness on Rick's part. His attitude is definitely ego-driven, but I think his actions were, in his own Rick way, kind of righteous. He was genuinely defending his daughter and her actions, and I think he really truly sees her as being better and more capable than the system in place, which, sure, you could argue is just an extension of his own ego since she's his daughter, but I choose to see this as a love and genuine confidence in his daughter, despite having had to bail her out here.
Oh shit, it's Rick Sanchez! Hey, my daughter is just as dangerous.
So, to me, this episode has a really great dynamic to explore, because we've basically got Rick, who is trying to be a better, more supportive father, and Beth, who is basically trying to prove herself to Rick, and that she's got her own value outside of being Rick Sanchez's daughter. It's a tough tightrope walk. They're almost contradictory. Beth basically wants Rick's help and support, but doesn't want to feel like he's taking the reins from her. And a lot of the conflict between them stems from Beth attempting to prevent that from happening, or to steer things back in her favor when Rick does take the reins. Like the entire Cisco debacle, which I think was one of the funniest and most creative sequences we've seen in the show in a long time. It's your classic here's the plan montage like in a heist movie that showcases them executing the plan under a voiceover of them explaining the plan, but the entire explanation of the plan is Beth arguing with Rick about the plan's over-reliance on Cisco, while the montage of the plan itself shows exactly how terribly it goes because Cisco didn't manage to keep up his end of the bargain. Really funny, really creative. But there are also really great sequences that show Rick and Beth pretty in sync in a fun father-daughter bonding kind of way. The interrogation scene in particular stands out. The way they tag team the threats against this dude are so funny. Beth just seems to know that Rick is going to use the portal gun to cycle this guy through being dropped from the third story. She catches him with absolutely no trouble. They even share a beer together afterwards. I found Rick and Space Beth's entire buddy cop shtick to be pretty endearing the entire time. They have fun banter, they're both quippy but still a little antagonistic towards each other.
That's new.
Super soldier formula?
I said new, not creatively trailblazing.
Seeing them slowly unravel the mystery and figure out the Gromflemite eugenicist's plan was pretty satisfying, despite the hiccups along the way. I would actually kind of love if we got these occasional Space Beth and Rick buddy cop episodes from now on. This was the first episode of the entire series to not feature Morty, crazy enough, not even in a B story, and it worked pretty darn well for me. They've expanded the roles of these side characters to a place where they can really carry an episode if they need to. And I also like the non-multiversal space adventure that focuses on the whole Galactic Federation of it all. I also think this sequence in the middle where they have to save Beth from the spore infection was another important one in terms of that Rick-Beth development. If you follow the whole Cisco debacle montage properly, it's clear that Beth never would have gotten hurt like this had the plan gone properly. But Rick's over-reliance on Cisco leads pretty directly to the shitstorm that gets Beth stabbed and infected with the spores. But Rick's diligent work to try and formulate the antidote is kinda touching. It maybe breezes by a little too quickly to properly take in, but I think his expressions while he's working here show some genuine concern, and we're talking about maybe a clone of his daughter for a historically very nihilistic character, one who did not really blink an eye when he abandoned a Beth, Jerry, and Summer in the Cronenberg dimension back in season 1. I do think that they're showing a lot of growth for Rick over the seasons, and he's developing sincere attachments to these versions of his family members and not just the idea of them. Rick even inhales the spores and tests out the antidote on himself before trying it on Beth, just to make sure that it will work properly. He's just showing a level of concern and diligence that he would definitely not have shown early on in the show. I don't know, I just really like this development here, especially the idea that Rick feels like he has an obligation to both versions of Beth. He's come a long way from holy shit, I'm a terrible father in season 4, and he basically lays this out pretty clearly to Bird Person.
I see you are parenting as well.
Oh, she called me. I'm trying not to blow it.
I will say, if there's anything about this episode that I didn't love, it's that the entire last act feels like an extended action sequence. And granted, I love the color palette and the animation. It's a really cool action sequence, but it definitely has video game boss vibes. Pretty fun to watch, maybe not a ton to talk about. It was fun to bring Bird Person and Bird Daughter into the mix. Seeing Bird Daughter in action again, just going absolutely ham on the Gromflemites was really entertaining. And within the action-packed finale, there were some great great character moments.
Glad you picked up my call, Dad.
Glad you called.
We don't have to do it all the time.
Just a really nice step forward for this specific relationship. There's even a pretty cool moment where Rick is being overwhelmed by the super soldier Gromflamites, and Beth jumps in to save him just in time, and then they carry the bomb to its place together. Just some good visual storytelling here. Also pretty fascinating that apparently now the Galactic Federation is good. No real indication of what that might mean moving forward, though the dialogue suggests that it might mean nothing.
The dawn of a new age. Not that we're going to be doing this every week. I mean, hopefully never again, actually.
This is very Rick and Morty to just be like, hey, here's a big development. Don't think too much about it. It probably means nothing. They maybe troll the audience a little too often with this kind of thing, and personally, I hope it does mean we get some different kinds of stories and dynamics with the Galactic Federation in the future, but who knows? The joke did make me laugh at least. The other fun development this episode has been teasing is the potential budding romance between Rick and Bagan. I do think that post Diane and Unity, it would be cool to start exploring Rick's dating life a little bit more. Definitely a great way to showcase that he's growing and moving past these major traumas that have been holding him back. My homies over at both Whitney Vision and The Roundtable talked about this aspect a lot more in depth than I did for this episode, so definitely go check out their videos after this one. But overall, while maybe not a peak episode of Rick and Morty, I really enjoyed this one. That Space Beth and Rick stuff just really does it for me, pushing forward character dynamics and relationships that to me indicate real growth for the characters. This entire episode features Rick in a more supportive role than we've seen throughout most of the entire show, and Space Beth has this nice little arc where she both proves herself to her father and proves her worth outside of her father. Space Beth was sort of able to step out from Rick's shadow while also not outright rejecting her connection to him. That little "I'm glad you picked up the phone" moment was really lovely. I gotta say, this is probably my favorite start to a season in years. Really solid back-to-back episodes, and next week looks to have some stuff that is very up my alley, finally diving back into the current state of the Citadel of Ricks. But what did you guys think of this week's episode? Did you like it more or less than last week? How do you feel about season 8 so far? Let me know below in the comments, and I think I'll be covering next week's episode. Who knows? We'll see. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.